Hi there, my name is Julie Dostal and I'm the Executive Director of the Leaf Council on Alcoholism and Addictions in Oneonta, New York, covering Otsego and Shenango counties. I am also here as a part of Scouting University and super happy to be here as a member of the Leatherstocking District Council. So welcome, glad to have you here today. And today I'm going to be talking about addiction in youth. Why does it happen and what does it look like? So when we're talking about young people these days, they're actually exposed to a lot in their communities. As you know, in our state, we have alcohol that's legal. We now have cannabis that's legal. We also have gaming that's legal. And young people often have access to medications that are in parents' medicine cabinets and other places within the home. So we need to be aware of what young people are exposed to. We need to be aware of how young people can develop the disease of addiction. And then what does it look like if a young person is starting to have problems with that? So first thing I want to talk to you about is some biological indicators of addiction. Now these are what we call unmodifiable risk factors. So if you think about risk factors related to heart disease or risk factors related to high blood pressure, risk factors related to diabetes, there are some things that we can do to modify our lifestyle to help prevent those things. With addiction, there are two risk factors in particular that are unmodifiable, and I want to talk to you about that because these are things that just are part of who we are. They can't be changed. There are things we can change. We can change how much we consume, how much we're exposed to it. We can change how often we're exposed to it. There are different types of things we can change that are modifiable. These biological risk factors are not modifiable, and if a young person has these in their life, it's important to be aware of that, especially for parents and people who are actively involved in the life of a young person. The first one is tolerance, or what we call sensitivity. And for some people, if they have one drink or two drinks, they get a little bit of a warm feeling, that happy feeling, and that's kind of all they ever need for the rest of their life. They have one drink, they have two drinks, they get the desired sensation from that, and they never have to drink more to feel the same good feeling. People who have a natural propensity to tolerance can have one or two drinks the first time they drink, and maybe the second or third or fourth time that they drink. But what happens is over time, what is required is more of those drinks. Let's just say beers, for example, because beers are usually the first thing that young people are exposed to. Let's say they have one or two beers, they get the buzz, they get the warm fuzzy feeling that they want, but 3 weeks, 3 months down the road, 6 months down the road, suddenly they're requiring 4 drinks to feel that warm fuzzy feeling. Or they're requiring 6 drinks to get that little bit of a buzz that they're looking for. And as that happens over time, people who have a natural vulnerability to tolerance will continue having to use more of the same substance in order to attain the same sensation that they were seeking. So that is one biological risk factor. Like I said, some people are born with no vulnerability to tolerance or little vulnerability to tolerance, and if they want one or two and they get the sensation that they're seeking, one or two will probably be about enough for the rest of their life. People with the vulnerability will tend to use a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more over time. That is a risk factor for addiction. It's a biological indicator. Another biological indicator that is unmodifiable is family history. And when we talk about family history, we're talking about someone who has, and look at this, a parent, a grandparent, or a sibling. So parent, grandparent, or sibling who has struggled with addiction. Now, I'll tell you from my life, I have parent, grandparent, and sibling. So I happen to have that particular biological indicator for addiction, and that is unmodifiable. We can't modify our ancestors no matter how much we try. So let's take a look at what the statistical risk of developing an addiction or developing a problem with a substance use if you have those unmodifiable risk factors. First of all, if you have one unmodifiable risk factor, so if you have either tolerance or you have family history, you have about a 36% chance of developing an addiction or having a problem associated with the substance. If you have no unmodifiable biological risk factors, you have still about a 21% risk of developing an addiction or having a problem associated with substance use. Now, please note that that 21% number right over here, that means that even if you don't have a unmodifiable biological risk factor, you still have a risk for addiction if you drink at high-risk levels or consume at high-risk levels, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. Here's the big number. If you have two of those risk factors, then there is a 60% probability, based on the science, based on the data, that you may develop an addiction or other problems associated with substance use. So let's talk about actually how addiction happens. Now, this is the short version. This is kind of like talking about addiction and learning about it by taking a sip of water out of a fire hydrant. This is quick, short addiction 101. So we have this amazing reward system in our brain. All of us have it. If you're living, breathing, eating, drinking, you have a reward system. This reward system is designed to keep us alive by rewarding us for things that are consistent with our survival and the survival of our species. So what does this reward system do? It takes in input, it feeds information to the parts of our brain that are responsible for keeping us alive. And then it says, oh, this is good for your survival or not good for your survival. Either do it again or don't do this. So here are the things that our brains and our reward system were built to reward us for. They were built to reward us for, these are things consistent with our survival. Eating and drinking, you get rewarded. So think about this. Let me just give you a tiny little example. Think about the most favorite thing in your world that you love to eat. I'm going to go with a piece of chocolate cake. The piece of chocolate cake, you eat it, it tastes awesome. Your brain goes, woohoo, this tastes awesome. Your brain says, oh goodness, it has calories, it has fat, it has milk. Well, maybe it doesn't say that. But it has everything that you need to stay alive, at least for the next 15 seconds. And it doesn't even really care if that piece of cake ends up on your hips. What it does is keeps you alive for the next 15 seconds. So that reward, that wow, this feels good, do it again, comes from our brain. It's built to do that. So eating and drinking is part of our reward system, protecting that fight or flight response. Our fight or flight response lives in our reward system. And then procreating, so I'm talking about the act of procreating. Everyone who's ever done it knows that there is a reward in our brain and the rest of our bodies. So we get rewarded for that because it is good for our survival and good for the survival of our species. And then once procreation has happened, we also are built to nurture our young. Now, if you think about holding a baby, that wonderful, awesome smell of a freshly washed baby, not the other one, not the other smells, but the nice, fresh smell for the baby. There is a reward in our brain that says, this feels good, do it again. So our brain is designed, created to reward us for the things that help us stay alive. And these become our survival cues: to eat, to drink, to protect ourselves, to procreate, to nurture. And that is the way that our brain functions appropriately. So let me tell you what happens when addiction comes into the picture. So if you eat the chocolate cake like I do, then that is a natural reward. Sugar is actually kind of high reward, so you get high rewards for that in your brain. What happens when a chemical, a substance, a drug comes into your brain is those hit your brain in such a powerful way. And if we're talking about young people, we're talking about brains that haven't finished developing yet. Adult brain development does not stop until about 25 for young ladies and about 28 for young men. So all the way up until, let's just go with 25. The brain is still developing, and that means that when drugs or chemicals hit the brain, they actually hit it even harder. And it triggers that reward system and overwhelms that reward system because all of the chemicals that are designed to keep us alive then flood our brain and actually can fool our brain into thinking that this is even better for our survival. And that's a chemical reaction. Then what happens is, if that happens enough, so if I'm consuming a high alcohol content beverage and I really overwhelm my brain, and I do it enough times, and my brain begins to learn that this feels good, it feels like survival, what can happen is those substances can actually replace my survival cues. And this is one of the things that can become so frustrating for a person who is struggling with addiction and for the people that love them and care for them, is that if the reward cues begin to be overwhelmed by the substance and the person's brain begins to believe that the substance is in fact survival, then they begin to do things that would seem to be confounding. So if we look at it in the adult population, people who struggle with addiction will pick the substance over their house payment, over their car payment, over their job, sometimes over their family. And it's really tough to understand unless you understand it in the context of the brain has literally lost contact with activities that are good for our survival, and the substance becomes the replacement for survival. And what happens after that is people begin to consume the substance in spite of negative consequences, and continuing to use the substance if they've had fights with their families, if they've had physical injuries, if they've had an accident in the car, if they've gotten a DWI. All of those negative consequences to a person who doesn't have addiction would signal, I need to change something here. With a person who has had their reward system altered, what it says is, I need to do more of this to survive, which just is illogical to people who don't struggle with addiction. But it is real, and it is true suffering, because people are aware that things that they're doing don't make sense. But when the inside of your brain is lying to you about what keeps you alive, it's really hard to argue with your own brain. So this is a really important point for people to understand, if for nothing else, but to help lower the stigma related to people who struggle with addiction. For young people, let's take a look at that survival mechanism in action when it begins to become impaired by substances. So these are what we consider the big three when we're looking at changes in a young person who might be struggling with addiction or who might be on the verge of struggling with addiction. First of all, a change in friends. So if you've got a young person who has kind of had a steady group of friends, you feel pretty good about them, life is kind of steady, good, you feel like it's okay for them to go down to the corner, go to the ball field, head to, hang out together, play video games together, and you start feeling good about, or you have felt good about your child's or your youth's friend group, and you start to notice that that has changed. And without really any good explanation, they're hanging out with a different group of friends that you may not feel the same way about, friends that you may feel concerned about. If that happens and there doesn't seem to be a good explanation about it, that might be a warning sign for a young person who's struggling with substances. A change in hygiene. So if you've got a young person who is fairly fastidious about taking care of their hair, their clothes, now adolescence, that the ball game is off there. So in adolescence, everybody tends to go through kind of that period in time where maybe hygiene isn't as important. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a change in hygiene. So you have a kid who takes care of themselves, they take their showers, they brush their hair, and either suddenly or slowly over time, that changes. And they have less care for their appearance, they have less care for their hygiene. That may be a warning factor of a young person who is struggling with a substance or an addiction. And then a change in grades. So you got an AB kid who is doing really good in school, life is going good, and there's not been a humongous change. We haven't had either a divorce in the family, or we haven't had a big move, or we haven't had to change schools. But suddenly your AB student is now a DC student, or even an F student. And there's no other explanation for why that's happening. Could be another indicator of a young person that is struggling with addiction. Now, I do want to point out here that could also be another indicator of a young person who's struggling with a mental health issue. So in either case, the best response to that would be to have the young person evaluated or assessed for what is going on, because if they change their friends, their hygiene changes, and grades change, those are all big red flags for something is going on. So here's some other ones that you might want to look for a young person who may be struggling with a substance or an addiction. Loss of interest in normal activities. So if there's a young person who is super into Scouts, everything you see there, they are involved, they want to be at every meeting, they want to, if all of that is going on, and you suddenly see that when they're there, they're not engaged with their friend group, or they hardly are attending anymore, or if you have parents who are talking to you about, oh my goodness, my young person was in soccer and they were in band and they did chorus and now they don't want to do any of those things, or they loved reading books and now I haven't seen them pick up a book forever. That might be a warning sign, as well as a change in appetite or sleep, because some drugs increase appetite, some drugs decrease appetite. Some drugs increase the desire to sleep, some drugs decrease the desire to sleep. Any of those things could just mean pay attention. Odd odors, unfamiliar items, these would be, if you're not aware of what paraphernalia items look like, if you're not aware of what certain things smell like, and you begin to smell things on or around the young person that are suspicious, that might be something worth looking into as well. If the young person is working, or if they, again, are very good at taking care of their school responsibilities, and that work ethic or that school ethic changes, and there's nothing else apparent, you may want to take a look at that. And finally, unverifiable excuses. So if they're late coming home, if they didn't turn in their homework, if they didn't do their project, and some amazing story is the response to why things didn't happen, and you're pretty sure that that was a cover-up for something that's going on, then either attempt to verify the story. And if they're not verifiable, and this is a continued and repeated pattern, then that young person might be struggling with substances or addiction. So if you're a leader for young people, parents may at times come to you for advice. And I would consider that an honor if a parent came for advice and they see something going on and either want to validate what they see, or they want to say, what do I do about this? I want to give you just a few little tidbits that you can share with a parent. I don't expect anybody to be an expert on an addiction, on substance use. We have people in our community that can help you with that, and I always want to be able to tell a parent, you're not alone. You do not have to do this alone if your young person is struggling. However, if you can take away from this just 1 or 2 jewels that you can share with a parent that is hurting, that is scared, that is nervous for their young person, please take just a few, the ones that work for you in your conversational style. And that would be to talk to the parent and say, first of all, we really have to make sure that the young person is healthy and safe. And so what you might want to do is talk to your young person about your concern in terms of, I'm really concerned about your health, I'm really concerned about your safety. Now, what does that do? That takes it right out of that moral judgment zone of, what are you doing? Don't be stupid. What is this happening? This is crazy. The kinds of things that would shut a young person down immediately if we said those things, and no judgment. Sometimes the anger boils up, things come out of our mouth, and we get 2 hours away from it and go, why did that come out of my mouth? So no judgment from here. I'm saying if you are a leader and have the opportunity to guide a parent, just have them remember that really what we want for our young people is for them to be safe and healthy. And if we're able to express that to young people to be safe and healthy, then start there. That is very much less defense producing than the finger wagging, what do you think you're doing conversation, even though that may be the first thing that we want to have come out of your mouth. Second, show love and concern, not anger. I love you. I care for you. I want what's best for you. Let's have a conversation. That might be a piece of guidance that you can give to a parent. Keep a cool head and speak calmly, because what tends to happen, especially for youth and adolescents, is they can escalate very quickly, and if we escalate with them, the escalation continues upward and upward and upward, and the way to edge out that escalation is to remain calm, even if they do not, and that's important. Here's another piece of guidance you may want to give to parents. Be direct, not abstract. I know this, I saw this, I found this, very specific, instead of it could be, it might be, it's sort of like, I heard, those kind of things. Kids are concrete. Most kids are concrete until they're in their 20s. So being abstract often goes right over their head and leaves the door wide open for some more of that escalation. And finally, withhold judgment. A lot of time, judgment comes out of our mouth based on fear. And if a parent comes to you looking for guidance, looking for advice, they're probably terrified. And so, as a leader, calm voices, calm response, and offering suggestions and guidance to parents about remaining calm in the midst of what feels like their world falling down around their ears will be one of the greatest blessings that you can give a parent. Some other tips, possibilities, as you're thinking about if you begin brainstorming with a parent. And remember, you're not the expert on addiction. You are a person who cares for their child. So sometimes parents want to grant kids immunity. Okay, one time, I know something's going on. I love you. I care for you. My heart goes out to you for what you might be struggling with. So this time, I'm going to let you give me an opportunity to tell me what's going on. No punishment, immunity. This deal's off in 2 hours. Sometimes that works, because if sometimes young people don't talk about what's going on with them out of fear of punishment. And if punishment's off the table, a parent may be able to have that conversation. If a young person says, no, that's not mine. So say you found something in the house. Say it's on the floor. Say it's in a drawer. And the young person says, no, that's not mine. My friend showed up and they left it and they were afraid that their parents were going to find it, so they put it in my drawer because I told them that my parents never come in my room. If that's the truth, then follow up on that and try to verify it if they're insisting that that's the truth. Don't let the teen stump you with questions. If the teen wants to throw it back in your face, well, I bet you smoked weed when you were a teenager, I bet you drank when you were a teenager, then what needs to happen in that case is say, you know what, I would love to sit down and talk to you about some of the choices that I made as a teenager and the choices that I made as I grew up. However, right now, I'm concerned about you. So I promise you, when we get through this, I will talk to you about my teenage years. Absolutely. And then focus on the behavior, not the person, and then make a plan. Whatever the plan is, if the plan is to get an evaluation, if the plan is to have an assessment, if the plan is that the phone is mine for 30 days so that you can't be in contact with the people I'm concerned about, make a plan and follow through. And so those are just some ways that you can have conversations with parents who are likely terrified. And I will leave these tips to make them available. I will leave them with the council, and so that if you need to review them and think about ways that you might have that conversation if a parent comes to you for guidance. And finally, where can a parent go? What do you do if you're concerned about your young person? Well, there are a couple of things, and there are different things that are available in different communities. So I'm going to give you some suggestions that you can give guidance to parents. First of all, school-based health. Some schools already have their own school-based health center where kids can go and maybe see a counselor, maybe see a social worker, maybe have a conversation with a pediatrician or a nurse pediatrician. Maybe you can go with the young person and have that conversation. So go ahead and check that out and see if your school has one. If there's a school counselor, you can get connected with the school counselor and ask about assessments, evaluations, to find out really what's going on with your young person. There are treatment centers, like in our Oneonta and Otsego County, there's the Addiction Recovery Services. They have both adult and youth services where a person can go and get a formal assessment. Go see pediatricians. Pediatricians understand the struggles that young people have. And of course, you're welcome to call us at LEAF, and we will talk to you and help you get people connected. Important to know, you leader, you parent, you are not alone. There are people who will walk side by side with you if a young person struggles with addiction or struggles with substances. The idea of stigma that something terrible is going on that I can't tell another person is gone. There is a person in your life that will walk through this with you and will probably be honored to do so if you make the ask. So with that, I am going to say thank you very much and appreciate the Leatherstocking Council on inviting me to have this talk, and be well. Thank you.